Good morning. This is Gretchen Young, Chair of the Seacoast, the Municipal Alliance for Adaptive Management. And this is the April 7th meeting. The video you're going to see here began recording in the middle of item number 3. You can see the written minutes for reflected of who was in attendance and the first 2 items. All right, thank you.
I'm willing to do some of that. It would be it would be useful then to look at scheduling that other deep dive opportunity. And I think, you know, what we heard is we're going to have to be careful to make it clear that this is not easy science, and yet we want to work with what we've got for science and kind of position the next steps and why we're spending the money that we're spending for these programs. And I guess that's on us as presenters to not oversimplify one way or the other and say it is reliant on a lot of the good work that we're getting from the regulators, from the scientists, and it's an ongoing process. So I think we can get there, and I think we're all just going to have to be mindful of that. But I do think it's helpful for the communities that are spending the money to at least know why we're going and asking for that money or for the ordinance changes that we're making.
I just added, yeah, I think I am. Katie Ambrose, City of Rochester. I think that's an important consideration and concern across the team, and I appreciate you bringing that forward. And I think, first of all, I agree with Suzanne's comments. I think it's just something that we need to keep in mind in the design of these as they move forward. And perhaps maybe the goal of thinking would be to focus most on what is it and why does it matter, so that we're establishing a baseline here to generate future opportunities for engagement, and to also kind of document some of those questions and comments that come up during these meetings, so we can talk about how we can follow up on those. But maybe the goal here really is, first, what is it and why does it matter, and what's going on in your community in terms of projects and what's coming down the pipe.
Excellent work. So, Melissa, one thing I'm taking away from this conversation that we can maybe add on to it is, and I'm happy to take on this role, is gathering, well, you've got questions and discussion facilitated by Melissa Perry. So then we'll just gather those questions, discussions, and then potentially go from there. Once we've done them, go from there at maybe some workshop series or some sense of follow-ups. I'll pass this down.
No, thank you. It's excellent to hear concerns about how to pitch this at the proper level that will be informative and engaging without being overwhelming, and enable people to at least begin a journey. I think it certainly is a long learning curve, but we need to start somewhere. So thank you, Suzanne and Katie, for your constructive thoughts, and we'll certainly be mindful about how to avoid getting too deep in details that overwhelm us and participants.
All right, any other questions on this piece?
Gretchen?
Yes.
Before we move along, I didn't start the recording, so if you could, I think we should probably summarize quickly what happened up to this point, so that when we put it online, it's there.
All right, in summary, we've done excellent work with people here today. We're not going to do full introductions again, but they'll be reflected in the minutes. The approval of minutes did pass unanimously with 1 abstention. And Melissa Paley, who represents the stakeholder committee for the Municipal Alliance, gave a description of the community conversations initiative that they've been starting, and we did receive some good feedback. There'll be some follow-up from there.
I would like to, I think that if we're summarizing, we had feedback, but we also had, concerns of, I would like it in the minutes that there was concerns raised about how we're going to get this done and how we're going to avoid misinformation. Like, that if we're going to cover minutes, don't whitewash my concerns by just saying it was good feedback.
Good point.
Yes, good point. Yep. Very good. You got the minutes? Okay. All right, great, then we're gonna pass it back to Melissa for additional information about your stakeholder pilot project.
Okay, so, the second proposal that the stakeholder committee is, pleased to present for your consideration, is a pilot project, surrounding, a system, a retrofit technology for, septic systems that's, effective at reducing, nutrient discharge. And this proposal is, was requested by, MAN. It is some agreement between CLF and the cities of Dover, Rochester, and Portsmouth. The three cities committed $15,000 each to support a pilot project that would test some type of innovative approach to nutrient load reduction in the estuary. And after considerable thought and consideration of a variety of innovative approaches, we might take this project kept bubbling to the top because of the impact of the contribution of nitrogen from septic systems in the watershed. As people are pretty well aware, about a third of the nutrient load, the non-point source nutrient load in the estuary is coming from the tens of thousands of septic systems that are used by about half of the people who live in the watershed. And while the volume, obviously, of discharge is very small, the effluent limits, the effluent, numerically, the amount of nitrogen in a septic system is quite high, and so cumulatively it has a large impact. The proposal that you see in front of you is not to test the efficacy of the technology that is done by certification agencies, National Sanitation Foundation, and others. It's really to explore questions that you might have about whether this is a practical or feasible approach to mix into your nitrogen reduction activities under the TNGP. So we really want to design the study to answer your questions, and that's something that we need to explore, is get a better sense of what are the logistical constraints and considerations that you would see of using something like this at scale that would be meaningful in reducing nitrogen load. So there's a big question about sort of the experimental design, but in a nutshell, the idea is to retrofit 10 households in 2 different locations around in 2 different communities, and to track the homeowners who have agreed to have this technology installed and see what kind of practical problems arise. Are they compliant? Did they get it inspected? Is it performing? What happens if the power goes out? Is it how much hand-holding needs to happen in order to get homeowners to use a system like this? So there's any number of questions. It's really about user compliance, interest, engagement, willingness to pay. These are the kinds of questions that we could explore in this pilot project.
So, to summarize, so the technology is proven?
Yes, so the technology that we're proposing to use is something called Sledgehammer. And it's a technology that it's basically a small canister that fits into an existing septic tank. It's got a rubber plastic membrane that's impregnated with bacteria. It gets connected to a power supply, and it basically aerates in the septic system and denitrifies off gases, NO2, so that what's leaving the septic tank into the leach field is 60 to 80% reduced in phosphorus and nitrogen. So obviously it's applicable in freshwater and in estuarine systems. So the system is well demonstrated. I have want to be very clear, I have no financial interest in this company, it's just that it's the only technology I've seen at a price point of about $4,500 per typical average household that achieves this level of nutrient reduction. And it needs to be inspected annually at a cost of about $150. The company that installs it or other independent septic system inspectors can do that inspection, make sure it's performing properly. And other than that, the benefits to the homeowner, that it extends the life of the septic system considerably. So there's that financial benefit to the homeowner. And then obviously the reduced nutrient discharge.
Has the subsurface septic system bureau been involved in this at all? Because it sounds like it's a different technology, because you're essentially turning the septic tank from an anaerobic system to an aerobic system.
Correct. Yes. Ted, I don't know if you want to address from a DES point of view, but I don't believe this system, I think that the Subsurface Bureau is aware of the system. We had a year-long shoreline septic system study commission that convened finished its work in 2020. And this technology got a considerable amount of airtime in the course of that, and the Subsurface Bureau at DES was quite involved.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I think that there's an effort to gear up to do a whole new effort on technology approvals and innovative technology approvals. I think that my understanding is that this is an aftermarket device that sits within an existing system. It doesn't change anything about the system except that it, does some squishing around in the septic tank. So that's my understanding, is that it doesn't impact the system. Does it need to be approved? I'm not sure it does. There's all kinds of things that have been sold for septic systems over the years that sit outside of the approval process. So I'm not sure that it needs it, but I can confirm that. We'll confirm that quickly as part of this to make sure that you don't run into some other issue. And my guess is that even for a study like this, it would be possible to be able to, get some sort of dispensation to do the study. But I would assume that there's any number of these that are out in the world.
Well, many of this system is used all around. When we did our feasibility analysis with Dr. Rosine on the feasibility of the total nitrogen general permit, he has a very comprehensive list of all kinds of management practices, and this technology costed out on a per pound basis of nitrogen removal of about $500 per pound removed. So it makes it a rather attractive system. But again, the problem is how is it feasible to use it at a scale that's meaningful in the context of a municipal approach to nitrogen load reduction. So I think those are the feasibility questions that we would like to explore.
Well, just from the standpoint of the technology, I know after seeing the recent, we had a nice innovative alternative septic system series of webinars we did last fall. There's, over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot of different technologies that came out. This one wasn't reviewed in the one that I was looking at, but the thing that I think, with the questions you're trying to answer here, I believe that the selected technology will have a big impact on the results of the study. So if you're looking at a $4,500 unit that sits inside a tank, not much impact. If you're looking at one of the other ones where you'll have to replace the septic tank or impact the septic system, might cost more money, but it might last longer. I just think that the technology selection, while it works for the cost of the study, might have a big impact on the results of the study. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. There are many advanced treatment septic system technologies out there that work incredibly well, and I think are very appropriate for redevelopment where there is going to be all this site work going on. But this is a system, and the only one, as I said, that I have become aware of that is a retrofit that requires no landscape, site work other than a conduit for power. So a small trench, So it's just has practicality or feasibility to be used in settings where advanced treatment, and in addition to which the cost of advanced treatment systems, new systems is, $10, $20, $30, $40,000. So.
I have a question maybe for Kala. If we were to pick one of the rivers to use it as a test base, how many of these units do you think we would have to install to get a measurable result in the testing that you're doing from the waterway? Because I mean, I think this is a really great way to address 20% of the nitrogen load that's going into the Great Bay. But if we thought a little bit bigger or differently, could we develop some sort of program that we could actually measure in Great Bay? And maybe Kala, you might be able to help me on that.
I think we could measure and come up with some estimates. Absolutely, Kastikian. I can't answer your first question without really thinking about it more, but yeah, I do think that we could come up with some assessments.
Right. I mean, it would be really nice if we took maybe a little bit more time on this proposal to think about, instead of 2 sites, if we just picked 1 site, for example, Bellamy River, that doesn't have a tremendous amount of homes. If we, if instead of doing 10, if we did, I don't know, some other number, 20, could we get an actual measurable result in the river?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think our intent here was not to spend a lot of money in monitoring, because we have a relatively small amount of money available here, and if we start monitoring, that would eat up the budget very quickly.
But we're already doing the monitoring in the rivers. So I mean, we're just taking advantage of money and activity that we're already doing and are required to do. I'm just wondering what a critical mass is of putting these things in that you see a measurable. I mean, the whole mission is to reduce the nitrogen in the river. So what is the critical mass of installing these things in one of the waterways that we could actually, take advantage of the existing measuring that we're doing in the waterways to measure a nitrogen reduction?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great suggestion as kind of as a follow-up. I think first we need to figure out whether it's even logistically feasible to consider this approach at scale.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you did a few more, why not? Or is this already accepted?
The issue is that it takes years, decades for water to move through the groundwater. So the nitrogen levels that we see coming from groundwater today are a reflection of the legacy of the land use over the last 20 years. So the impact of reducing nitrogen from septic systems is something that will be seen a decade or more from now. So measuring it in the water body itself is not practical at this moment. This is why a modeling and maybe individual septic system measurements could be done, but trying to actually measure it in the environment would be very, very difficult, even at scale, for decades.
I wanted to follow up, because I've been kind of thinking about this as well. And Chris, to your question about the permitting, I think we brought this up with DES and the numbers. Eventually, if we did roll it up to scale, it would have to have a permitting component somewhere, so that if we incentivized homeowners to do this on their private property, we would have to have some sort of trigger or limit that they were hitting, because if this really takes off, somebody's going to come along and want to compete with Sledgehammer, right? So that's part of what I hope Melissa will be looking into as part of this study, is what would be, if it became a big scale, what would the language look like, or what would your targets look like? And then as for, talking about this, we won't see the results from this for 2 decades, that kind of conversation came up as part of all of the negotiations that we went through to get to this permit, is that we recognize that there are a myriad of ways that we can reduce nitrogen. Some are going to be longer term, some are going to be shorter term. So while we continue to study the Great Bay, figure out really how that is all working, we also wanted to be able to show these good faith efforts that we're making to EPA and to others. And so we hope through the permitting, through the discussion of adaptive management, we hope that EPA recognizes that, we did roll something like this out at a big scale, and we knew that it was making a big impact, but that impact wouldn't necessarily be felt for 10, 20 years. We would still be, I guess, recognized for that work, right? I see some EPA people shaking their heads, or nodding their heads, but recognized for that work, and not penalized for not having the immediate turnaround because they recognize that there is this long-term impact. So really good points, and I think I hope Melissa hears those, and the stakeholder committee really focuses on some of that.
Well, I mean, to somewhat address what Todd is raising, I think the purpose of the study, if I get it correctly, is this a technology that people will, at these 10 sites, embrace, work to maintain, continue to keep plugged in for the electrical usage? So based upon the technology, though, the presumption is that the technology works, because to be honest with you, to attest the true effectiveness of it, and I'm sure this developer Sledgehammer already did this, you really need a monitoring well within 3 to 5 feet of the actual septic system to see if there's a marked reduction in the nitrogen coming from that septic system in that effluent. Now, I just ran some numbers. I've got about 1,000 shoreline communities in Milton. So roughly about 1,000 septic systems. At $5,500 a piece for this technology would cost Milton taxpayers, or to be involved in this, $5.5 million. For $5.5 million, I could run sewer lines to those homes, connect them, and as the information already stated, have a much more marked and immediate effect to reduce the nitrogen in Great Bay. So from a wholesale perspective, like in a built-up waterfront community like I have, it wouldn't make sense to do these. But this technology, and this is what I think the study's trying to figure out, is those random and spread out septic systems that are directly adjacent to or along water bodies. Would this be an effective solution for them rather than, if you will, extending municipal sewer? And that's kind of what I perceived with that's why I asked the initial question, the study's not to prove whether the sledgehammer worked, it's to prove whether this is viable and for Costa's benefit. As a septic designer, 25 years ago, they had a filtration system that you could put in the effluent, the exiting line from a septic tank. It required the homeowner to go out, lift the cover off their septic system once a year, lift this thing out and spray it down. It got about 1% participation from the homeowners. I never, as a designer, installed one, because these are the same people I couldn't even get to call and have their septic tank pumped on a regular basis. I was kidding myself and them to think they'd actually go out and sort of, spray fecal matter off of their septic tanks, off of this filter system. So this is kind of the same thing. Will the people allow, plug these things in and run them, and will they allow somebody to inspect their yards? Because I know on all my waterfront properties, to actually do the inspection, unless they've got a permanent inspection port, built into their landscaping, it means digging up their lawn. And most people are like, no, I don't want you digging up my lawn. And that's the real issue. Is there going to be public community participation at this level? But
Thank you, I think that you perfectly encapsulated the intent, the intent of the project and the kind of questions that we're seeking to address, so thank you, Chris. And I would invite anyone who's interested in becoming more involved with this pilot project to join the steering committee.
All right, yes, sir. Got one more in the back? Paul? Yeah.
Research question number 5. What is the average cost for commercial completion of septic system upgrade technology? If this is a proven company, you should already have that information. There might be a little bit of tweaking of homeowner maintenance ideas, but really, to find the effectiveness of this like retrofit type of thing, almost got to know what the delivered load is at Great Bay, not just what is the removal right after septic system. So it's just a comment.
Suzanne?
Yeah, so I'm gonna concur wholeheartedly with Chris on this, on the whole, pros and cons, and really what the research questions are. Let me just ask, are you, Melissa, looking for approval from the MAM to expend the $45,000 that was in this settlement agreement for this purpose, or are you still vetting? Is this his initial vetting, or is this a final ask? I mean, granted, it's just the 3 communities of Rochester, Dover, and Portsmouth who are part of that agreement. So are you just taking information right now and feedback, and then planning to come back to Dover, Rochester, and Portsmouth for, final approval of this project?
I actually think it would be beneficial to take the pulse of MAM now. Is this project something that you want to continue? Is this the pilot project that you would be willing to fund with the money that we allocated for innovative approaches to nitrogen reduction? I don't want to go further in developing the proposal if this is not something that you want to fund.
Okay, so this is input at this point, and then we'll follow up again, depending on what we all kind of take back from the conversation today. Is that right, or do you want to vote today?
I would, I don't say that you need to vote on this today, but I would like, I don't want to put this off for decision-making until the next MAM meeting, so it would be helpful to know if this is something that you want to fund, before we continue to develop the project any further.
Okay, that's helpful. I think you have an agreement with me somewhere, but I think it's just Dover, Rochester, and Portsmouth who will be signing off on this. So I think maybe what we can do is we can collectively go back to our crew, Public Works, and have a conversation about what we've heard today and digest this further, and then maybe we can give you feedback directly on whether we have concerns, maybe we help you focus the research questions, because I think it is all about what do you actually want to get out of this study for all the reasons we've heard, and then kind of sharpen in on what communities you think would be most appropriate, because I think all of us in our communities who have sewers, municipal wastewater treatment facilities, make that calculus of, do we extend the sewer lines because of all the reasons that were really articulated, or do we have some of those isolated pockets that it's impractical, but is this really the solution, this pilot of these septic systems? Will people actually leave it running, or when electricity gets high, they unplug it, right? So I think, if we can take all of this back, then Dover, Rochester, and Portsmouth can reflect upon this, and then we can figure out whether it's just a yes from the communities, or whether we bring it back. We have the ability to make some decisions, you know, without the formalities of a big meeting like this through the executive board, so I'm sure we can get some responses. That would be excellent, so I think both the thumbs up or down, as well as, you know, the help in the questions and sharpening the questions as we go. And I will just say that the Stratford Regional Planning Commission has agreed to serve as the fiscal agent for the project, so the money would funnel, would go to SRPC. That was a helpful piece, because we were trying to figure that out recently. Yeah, yeah. And then SRPC would have to deal with Rochester, I think, as fiscal agent for MAM, and some of the questions around, you know, do you have to go out to bid, or, is, you know, all those kinds of questions that we're waiting on. So, thank you. Great. Thank you. So we'll consider it taken under advisement, I guess. Yeah, great.
All right, thank you. Do you have any other comments? I would request to move item number 8 up because it's an introduction to some of the EPA folks, and I would love to engage them in the conversation that we're going to get into, number 5. Would anyone be willing to make a motion to
Move to
item-
bring forward item 8, introduction discussion with EPA forward.
Second.
All right, we'll do a roll call vote. We'll start right here. Suzanne? Newman?
Aye.
Katie Ambrose? Chris Jacobs?
Aye.
Jennifer Perry? Gretchen Young? Aye. And Ray McNeil, will you join us?
Aye.
All right, excellent, that's unanimous. We're going to move on to introduction and discussion with EPA non-point source department. And I titled that before I really had a chance to meet some of the folks, but, so I apologize. But Mel Cody, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you and let you do an introduction. And,
Absolutely. Happy to do that.
so happy that you guys are here today.
So are we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Willing to come to the table?
Sure, I can do that. First of all, I'll just say, I'm very happy to be here, particularly because it's the first external in-person meeting I've participated in since early March of 2020. I think it's good to say for Danielle. I know Mark was down here recently for the meeting. But again, we're really happy to be here today to learn about the stormwater and non-point source management that we're doing, reduce nitrogen and other pollutant loads to the Gateway watershed. And I think everybody knows that we have a historic opportunity to use a very innovative watershed permit that relies heavily on voluntary action by the permittees to restore and protect Great Bay, which EPA designated as a national restorative national significance back in 1995. Our primary message today is that we're really interested in the progress, and we're ready to assist in any way that we can, because we really want you to succeed. If you succeed, we succeed. It's very much a collaborative effort as we see it. And so to help us stay informed with the work, we're committed to continuing to participate in EPAC, for example. We've had staff from our stormwater non-point management programs participating in that all along, and we intend to continue to do that. We are going to continue to participate in the PRNC monitoring effort, which of course is led by a PREP, which is on, and with assistance from the UNH Stormwater Center. And if you wish, this group as well. This is the first man meeting we've participated in. Happy to continue to engage with this group, which we know is called the Blue, that I think ties together a lot of the other efforts, so particularly important. And we're also meeting regularly with New Hampshire DES, TED, and Sally and their team to share information and talk about how we can work together most effectively. A little bit about myself. Since 2015, I've served as the chief of the Surface Water Protection Branch at EPA Region 1. My branch administers all the Clean Water Act programs except for NPDES permitting and the Clean Water SRF. Those are different branches in our water division. Prior to that, I managed our ocean coastal programs, which including served on
prep management committee with Jennifer and some others. After 13 years, and then before that, I spent most of the first 12, my first 12 years in the Long Island Sound Test Program Manager, and the non-point source program coordinator. A role that's similar to Eric's, that Eric has with New Hampshire. Both Danielle and Mark were here with me today, introduced themselves, and they're in our stormwater permit section, the water permits branch. Mark and I go way back because before coming to EPA, he consulted with Met Health and Katie, and I believe I was a work assignment manager for a contract we had with Kennedy to do a stormwater mapping effort for Freeport, Maine, for the whole. It's a lot bigger now than it was then, but it still was pretty easy to develop back then, and there were a lot of local water quality problems associated with all those parking lots. And I was this rod man when we did the survey work for the stormwater drainage system. And that was, I think, in the summer of 1991. And then Mark joined EPA shortly thereafter. Initially in our PMDL program, now working with stormwater. Eric Beck, who's joined, and I should have mentioned Abed also virtually is with us, and he's also in the stormwater section. Eric, who's also participating remotely, serves as our regional coordinator for both PrEP and the New Hampshire P19 and non-point source program, as well as the New England Environmental Finance Center, which is another resource that if you don't already know about, we hope to share more information. So collectively, we bring a lot of knowledge and experience with stormwater and non-point source management, as well as water quality standards, water quality monitoring and assessment, and water quality restoration planning. We have experience with stormwater and non-point source management initiatives around New England, and are willing to share the knowledge and information we've gained through technical assistance and training, either by us or other partner agencies and organizations. And then regarding the letter we're about to discuss, that we received a couple of weeks ago, and based on other information we have, we agree with their overall assessment of progress and encourage you all to continue working on developing more detailed, targeted measure and control plans, largely because it's a lot easier to track progress when you have a detailed plan that identifies specific structural and non-structural best management practices with timelines for implementation, as well as more detailed processes to assist with fiscal planning. And that's really critical. So I'm going to stop there. Again, just the primary thrust of our meeting today is we want to help you and help ourselves achieve these goals over the next couple of decades. There are a lot of things that can be done in the shorter term, and at the same time planning for some more systemic or institutional changes that could be made, especially with new development as it comes in, and that's got to be a point in people's minds along with the retrofits and existing areas. So I'll stop there, and I'm open it up for any discussion. I also would offer to Mark and Danielle if you have anything you want to add, any important points, because I'm sure I'm giving a high level overview there. Would you like to say anything?
Thanks, Mel. Hi, everyone. So, like as Mel said, we have been engaged with the whole retrofit business for quite a while, starting with Charles River. And we've learned a lot. We've worked hard on trying to develop approaches, credits, things like that that help inform how to make management decisions. And one of the things we've learned over the time is that this is an evolving field, and every time we interact into this meeting, we learn a lot about the realities of this work. It's a steep learning curve, we think, and we really want to have a transparent back and forth discussions that we're understanding the realities, and at the same time sharing the lessons we've learned if that's even or not, because you're unique that you have the stormwater center so close, and Dover has done some pretty groundbreaking work with the Barry Brook study. So I just want to emphasize that this is a big learning opportunity for us in the stormwater program. And the thing that, part of why we're here as well as doing this type of work fitting into our scope, is we do have the next, we do work on the MS4 permits, and we want to make sure that we're complementary to the efforts and And so we have a lot to learn. I just want you to know that that's where we're coming from. And we appreciate the opportunity very much.
Thank you, Mark. And just one other thing I'll mention, related to septic systems, and I was really happy to hear about the interest and efforts you're looking at along those lines. We are working, we've got a lot going on in Cape Cod, we've got a lot of similar to nutrient, nitrogen-related estuarine impairments, some different scales, but down there, septic systems are by far the largest source of nitrogen to those estuaries, and of course, because it's essentially a big sandbar, the travel times from those systems to the estuarine containments is significantly faster. So it's also where the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center is located, which we helped set up back in the early 1990s with systems to a Buzzard Spade National Estuary Program. And one of the things we've done most recently is help develop, we actually had a technology challenge for a nitrogen sensor, where it's essentially a device that goes into where the effluent pipe from the septic tank goes out, that monitors the nitrogen. It actually uses nitrate and ammonia, I think, but become wrong and he knows better, as surrogates for full nitrogen, but it's been determined that we need within a couple percentage points of accuracy. We actually had a winner from SUNY Stony Brook University, and these sensors are now going into field testing on the Cape and down in Suffolk County, Long Island. Another sandbar, which I'll have down in our Region 2, working with our Region 2 office. So there's a lot of great work going on septic systems, and I know DES is plugged into those, and we'll continue to try to share that kind of information as well. Questions or any?
All right, well, open up, any questions, yes, Suzanne?
So, two questions. So it sounds like, and this is not new, but just want to kind of close the loop on this, that if we decide to proceed with looking for a location for a pilot program, soils and obviously proximity to a water body is kind of high on the list, because obviously depending on the soil type, that goes into the travel time, and so we might want to be really sensitive to that aspect of it, not just location, but soil type, if we can find the right group, cluster of houses or whatever, if we decide to pursue that pilot program.
Yeah, that would definitely be very good, exactly what we want to consider.
Second, I was curious if you've had any challenges with kind of facing the how a municipality or county, for that matter, works with investments on private property. So, as a practical matter, when we're putting sewer pipe in the ground, it's usually in our roadway, it's municipal infrastructure in our right of way. Generally, there are exceptions, working with one. The cost of the service from the road to the house, that's all private in a more typical scenario is here in New Hampshire. We've been kind of struggling with that issue of what happens when you begin to take public money and put it on private property, and how that works. And I'm wondering if you have any experience with other municipalities that have kind of thought about that and kind of looked for messaging on why it's not a private benefit to the private property owner, because it's something we're cognizant of, because it's atypical in our in here in New Hampshire, or what we're familiar with.
That's definitely one of the biggest, I'm not going to call it an obstacle, but issues that need to be addressed, and it's probably a little bit different in every state, just the way that state laws and regulations are set up. One of our programs, it's not an estuary program, but it's one of our geographic programs, the Southeast New England program that covers sort of the South Cape down to Rhode Island, Narragansett Bay sub-region. It's going to be funded. Well, that's the thing is, there aren't a lot of examples of widespread, large-scale implementation of innovative alternative systems or these retrofits that have had to sort of really answer that question. But we're going to be some of the infrastructure money that the Southeast Indian program is getting. Going to be working with the state and Cape Cod permission to establish what we call, at least in Massachusetts, I don't know how widespread it is, responsible management entities, RMPs. It's a term of its sort of it actually sets up sort of an institutional and financial framework for how you actually do invest sort of federal dollars in private properties for the purpose of, in this case, RMPs or specific septic system installations, or ideally, more advanced systems that remove nitrogen. But Mark, you might know a little bit more about that. And to be certain, when you take lessons learned from any of these geographic programs and spread them widely throughout this region, that's really important.
I think in the stormwater realm, it's still early in the process, so the attacking is even on a sport permit, which includes a lot of private property discharge management systems. And that's an unknown because they're just entering into the implementation phase. Some towns, cities like Cambridge, for example, has no problem going right out into the private properties and implement it to I've done that, usually through redevelopment. One of the things that we think and we sort of see people going towards is as they start considering the stormwater funding utility, and you get membership or you get people participating, it becomes a collection of the resources to be able to implement in the best way that makes sense. So that's the thought that will facilitate interaction with private properties. Long Creek, as you probably all are pretty familiar with, has that watershed permit, and they all pay, and they've worked out that how to interact with private property. But that's different than the question. So I don't think we've really done there yet, and I think in New England, the stormwater utilities are still relatively scarce. I think there's a lot to be figured out on that. Unfortunately, don't have.
I am interested though in that responsible management enterprises, so keep an eye on that.
Entities, which is the name of it. I'm committed to going back to my team that works more directly on septic systems and these RMEs to get some feedback on how and what extent that issue has been effectively addressed anywhere else that we can share.
Just add, actually, Diane McNabb, who may not be on the phone any longer, but one of our stakeholder committee members sent me a list of some research that she's done on public funding for septic system infrastructure. And there are many states that actually provide 50% or 100% even of the cost of these installations. So like New York State, Rhode Island has a program, Maryland has a program. So that I think there are examples, many examples of at a state level where this kind of technology is recognized as an alternative to other kinds of pollution control infrastructure and is legitimately considered a public expense, even though it's applied on private property. And I was actually very intrigued with Exeter's adaptive management plan included a proposal that they be experimenting with a state, with a local loan fund. So, it was very, very cool to see this town thinking along those lines.
I can briefly speak to that. We had success in our J.D. Hill project where we were looking to address inflow and infiltration beyond just the town-owned facilities, and the private services were contributing, or expected to be contributing up to 70% of that. And we had fully vetted public discussions about using town funds to provide incentives to private property owners to make those improvements. And so that experience gave us the incentive and the idea to continue along those lines. Not sure that everything we're doing was state vetted, but it certainly was vetted at the local level.
Yeah.
Just one thing point I would make relative to EPA funding that's coming down the pipe in terms of the infrastructure, the new infrastructure funds that are coming, is that a significant focus of that is going to be on disadvantaged communities. And so to date, you know, we've had a fairly narrow definition of what disadvantaged communities means. And I would suggest to you all that you engage in that conversation as DES begins putting together its definitions of what disadvantaged means relative to the populations within your communities, because there may be places, neighborhoods, that currently are disadvantaged and would benefit maybe from sewering. I don't think that the lakes are going to be one of those, but you know, that could be a potential way of bringing that in. If that's not part of the definition of how we're looking at that as that intended use plan goes back to EPA for approval, then that could be something that you might want to comment on. So I just want to throw that out there because there's a lot of dollars, and the advantage of the disadvantaged communities part of that funding is that there may be loan forgiveness up to 49%. So these are some of the things that I think you all should be aware of. It's harder to find those kinds of ideas in the Seacoast area. There are some exceptions, and those exceptions may be one of the part of the planning that you all are thinking about. So it may be something that you know, at least should ponder as a group of communities going forward.
Do you happen to know, I'm thinking of certain areas, you know, for example, within our community, that may be under the control of a local housing authority, for example, that is sort of a disadvantaged pockets, if you will, of enforcement. And I'm wondering if, in the definitions, whether they would be excluded or included, because I hate to have them excluded, because
Again,
we
this
have
is why I
defined
think
needs.
I suggest that you weigh in on this
Okay.
issue.
All right.
Because this is important, and this may be a place where EPA has to be but they may have resources relative to EJ, because there is a significant EJ, environmental justice, push within this particular administration. And so they may have resources, technical resources to bring to bear to help you with those kinds of analyses. So I just want to, this is a slightly outside of the realm that we're talking about, but when we're talking about the federal funding, the current priorities, and the current buckets of money, that those are important aspects for you all to think about.
Yeah, certainly there are pieces of the properties that we already recognize, and, you know, could probably use some retrofits from a stormwater perspective and doing some other things.
I'm sorry, I have to run to a call, but I'll be right back.
Yeah, you know, Ted's actually a better advocate than I've been, just in terms of our current administration's priorities, and I was remiss in not hitting on a couple of those key themes, which are environmental justice and if we can, you know, attention to disadvantaged and underserved communities and residents, but also climate resilience. So those are the things that are overarching principles that are really, really critical to this current administration and other federal agencies advancing this agenda. And so, for example, with the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure law, a lot of those funds that will be going through EPA, and I assume it's also going to be similar for other federal agencies like DOT, where there's going to be a lot of other money to do with stormwater for public transportation systems. 40, you know, they're part of what's called the Justice 40 initiative, whereby 40% of the investments, or at least the benefits accrued from those investments, need to be in disadvantaged and underserved communities. We're sorting through all different sorts of guidance on different programs, maybe different from the SRA, the State Revolving Fund, than it would be, we know, for the geographic programs like the estuary programs, and like the self-fulfillment program like Champlain. Those will be tracking and trying to achieve the 40% goal of getting those funds out to, again, the environmental justice population.
I don't want to go back to our separate proposal, but just to note that the idea of the two different study sites is specifically intended to test it in two, not so much in soil types and things like that, but in two different sort of demographic, socioeconomic neighborhoods. Because I think that would could produce very different results, right? So one that's maybe the more typical waterfront community with, higher end homes, and another that is, more modest and, more typical and community. So please give that thought when you're discussing this.
I saw that, I thought that was entirely appropriate. Trying to find those previously.
All right, and I just have to say that this conversation has been really great. We've been talking about, and we can get into it a little bit, but talking about putting together our identifying, potential sites for non-point source BMP implementation, which we've been working a lot with Julie Poole, and I think just the environmental justice and the climate change could be two things that we look at when we're looking at sites as well. So, this is a really good conversation. And do we have any other questions right now? I think we're going to have more good discussion in the next. I don't see anything else, so I'm going to move on. And I'm actually going to pass this over. It's kind of the Melissa show today a little bit, but Melissa Paley from CLF did put together a letter to EPA talking about the progress on the total nitrogen general permit. And I think it's a really fantastic opportunity to talk about that because we've got a lot of the players here today. So I'm going to let her kind of talk through the background of that, and then we can go through some of the specifics. And I think we can really brainstorm some ideas on how to address some of the items that came up. So pass that on to her.
Yeah, I do apologize for taking up a lot of the airtime here, because I know there's a lot on the agenda. So Gretchen circulated the letter that CLF sent to EPA about 2+ weeks ago. And I'm happy to answer questions, but I thought it might be just really helpful to quickly explain, I mean, I think it's all in the letter, but the reason why we felt it was important at about the 1-year mark since the permit went into effect to provide these comments to EPA, and I'm so delighted that, it's, the letter's been largely well received. The first purpose was to encourage EPA to be involved, to be engaged, and I'm just thrilled to see all of you here today. We did not want to have a situation where, it's kind of like going through high school without any feedback for 4 years, and then you get to graduation and uncertain as to whether you pass or get a diploma or you don't. So I think having this kind of ongoing engagement is going to be very helpful in providing feedback and technical support and financial resources and any number of other helpful tools to, as noted, to be sure that, that you all succeed and that we make real progress here in the SBA. Our second reason for writing this letter was to encourage EPA to provide a little more structure. The way the permit was written was kind of a bit of a blank slate, that we should provide adaptive management plans, but there wasn't a lot of detail about what those plans needed to look like. And I think the communities did an amazing job in a very short time of submitting these adaptive management frameworks. But they're sort of all over the map. And I think going forward, our feeling is that a more structured nitrogen control plan that has more consistent ways of estimating the impacts of all the activities that you're proposing would be helpful in being able to measure progress and to assess whether we're sort of in the ballpark of what the permit is trying to achieve over certainly the first 5-year period, but then over multiple permit periods. So that was the second intent. And the third, I think, was to make to ask EPA to make sure that the communities understand a very important provision of in the settlement agreement between CLF and the cities of Rochester, Dover, and Portsmouth, but which applies to all the communities regulated under this permit. And that is the provision to petition EPA to revoke coverage under the general permit if municipalities are not making meaningful progress, and that term meaningful progress is in the settlement agreement. And this is a very, very important, component of the settlement agreement. And we want to be sure that all municipalities recognize that it applies, not just to the NAM communities here, but to the others who are not participating in NAM. And so that really was the third reason for wanting to submit this letter to EPA. So that's all I got to say on that,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I think we have a good conversation. If you'll allow me, I kind of dive in with some of my thoughts and then maybe kind of open it up. The idea, okay, none of us want to get to the 5-year. I think you're completely right. None of us want to get to 5 years and not know where we are. So in doing this, we had the 3 communities talked about doing an annual report out, which is coming out in September. We talked about that being a good time. The annual, so the adaptive management plan was due July 1 of 21. So, the first full year of implementation would be July 1 of this year. Report outs in September, which really aligns with the MS4 communities report out as well, which would come in for that's the same year for MS4 communities. So those were the 3, Dover, Portsmouth, and Rochester. We're going to do that as well. And I think all of the other communities would benefit from doing that annual report. And this first year has been a lot of implementation of the things that were in the adaptive management plan, and obviously groups are at different, or communities are at different points, but every community I know is making strides to implement the things that were in the adaptive management plan. So I think we'll have that report out. I also think, and Jamie Poole can speak to this a little bit more, or Sally Sewell, but PTAP, we're going to actually be able to get some reporting back. And the first year of implementation is going to be varying levels, because some communities have been doing it all year and some are really just implementing as the year progresses. But as that gets to be more of a routine and built into where we can make improvements when we're having good years and maybe not as strong of years. So I think we're going to get a lot of good data out of those. And, something that I guess we could ask EPA or even DES to think about is maybe looking at those report outs, commenting on those report outs, getting feedback of some sort. And that's something that we've done with Martine, who does the MS4 permit. She's been really great at taking a look at our annual reports for the MS4 and giving us, non-binding, but feedback. So something, maybe we can ask the EPA to do. And then my one other thing that I wanted to take a second just to talk about is the in-depth nitrogen source reduction plans that we had. And the CLF letter notes that there are different levels of feedback, different levels of plans. And I think the 3 communities that were part of the settlement agreement had taken a deep dive, really looking at all the projects that they had, where the nitrogen reductions could come from. Some of the other communities hadn't.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to check on something. This is Kala. Maybe Hannah is experiencing the same thing. We out here in Zoom world are not hearing anything currently.
Yeah, I'm not hearing anything either.
Yeah,
Same
it's
here.
frozen.
Same here.
Yep.
Say that again?
We can't hear anything.
Can you guys hear us now?
Yeah.
we can hear it now.
But it's been cutting out for the last 2 or 3 minutes. It'll go out for like 20, 30 seconds at a time. So if you guys wouldn't mind just looking up at us, and we'll kind of go like this if there's a problem.
That sounds good. Okay, I apologize for that. But I was just talking about some of the hotspot maps that are hotspot work that's been done. And I have examples of Dover, which is a larger community, and we've built on a lot of this. And I also have Rollinsford, which is a smaller community represented here today. But that work has been provided for each of the communities. And I've been talking to Tom Swenson, who also works for DES, and he's put together a spreadsheet. I don't have copies of it here today. He did send it to me in draft, but we're working on a spreadsheet to analyze each one of those properties and be able to determine the BMP potential. Now, this is something that the MS4 asks us to do, but I think we can really build on that for some of the smaller communities to develop a more, I guess, more structured nitrogen source reduction plan. So I would say that those two things are in the works, and they're rolling out as we speak. Like Tom Swenson had just finished that spreadsheet. And that work is geared towards the communities that don't necessarily have the consultants working for them, or don't have, my position, which is really focused on looking at properties and figuring out the NPs. So we are working to make it easier for all of the communities to put together their nitrogen source reduction plan. And I think that hits on some of the stuff that the CLF letter had brought up. So I guess with those two comments, looking at Jamie.
Can I just add on to that PTAP has made some pretty large strides to providing that consistent form of accounting from structural and non-structural BMPs that CLF letter spoke to and asked for. So that's been done. And the hotspots focus first on municipal properties. That's generally what was asked, particularly in the consent order that Exeter and Newmarket had first signed. And the idea there is we've got probably a decade of work on municipally owned properties before we get to the more, and that gives us time in parallel to be talking about these RMEs and these different types of agreements that may be necessary as we move into private property.
I would just say that we're committed at DES, committed to continuing to try to make sure that PTAP remains a viable tool for you all, and you are committed to making sure that you have the technical assistance that you need in order to apply both PTAP as well as hotspot mapping. We have a new proposal to help with some of that. Unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of a fiscal year, so we may have to wait until the next fiscal year to be able to fund. But we do have some dollars, and I want to also just point out that SRF has been making up to $100,000 planning grants available, $100,000 loan forgiveness loans. I always get that a little bit wrong. It's not a grant. It's a loan that you're getting loan forgiveness on. For up to $100,000 for planning grants, and these are the kinds of things that could be done with those planning grants. So if Milton, for example, wanted to do a little deeper dive on your properties and you needed some dollars to be able to do some additional mapping or mapping products, that is something that you could request from the SRF program. The new application for the 22 projects is going to be out on the streets ASAP. There's a workshop next week. Monday is the workshop. So I encourage you to look at those, because those are additional resources for you to be able to have the funding to build your nitrogen reduction plans, build in some of what you think are the accounting on those. What are they going to yield you in terms of both pounds as well as costs? These are things that you certainly would have resources to be able to address. That was a really good time.
Great.
there's a lot of dollars floating around.
Can I ask, if those dollars also then could be used for some of the work that we're doing on the stormwater utility front to get those loans?
Yeah, I don't see why not. This is part of the planning grants. That's a planning effort. That's directly related to meeting the permit criteria. That's the focus of SRF. That's the sweet spot right there. Yeah.
So help rapid that utility work.
I don't see why not. I think that that's certainly a viable project under those funds. And I can confirm that if you want to chat further. We can confirm that with the good folks in SRF. But, you know, I think that those are the kinds of things that we're highly committed to as an agency.
Hello, Ted and others. This is Deb Loisel from New Hampshire DES, and I'm one of the program managers for the Stormwater Clean Water SRF program, and developing a stormwater feasibility study for stormwater utilities is absolutely a qualifying project under the stormwater planning loan.
I've also been given feedback that the CFRN funding could potentially be used for stormwater utility planning. There's a $100,000 grant with no match. And after this meeting, I'm going to go finish writing that application.
What's that?
Next Friday.
Yeah, you're correct. I'm really glad you just brought this up, because you're absolutely right. Those could be used, probably both of those. I'm not just speaking for the but I think it's worth putting applications in for coming up with your nitrogen source reduction plans. Obviously, that's just a perfect match.
Yeah, you just give us plans, so you.
If you could just give everyone that's me, because you did do a really good job for.
We're working on cloning.
Close. This is a side note, but Councilor Shanahan described him as a ninja yesterday. Why?
I'm still running with
Bam,
that.
bam. I know. That's my other side.
I would, can I just also, just while I'm stuck, your deputy mayor yesterday was phenomenal, right, legislative in front of RRD, talking about the benefits of stormwater utility. It was really quite good.
You did a great job. Did a great job running that conversation. Well, then to put EPA on the spot, any thoughts on potentially looking at the work that we an annual report or something like that, and provide feedback so that you're sort of addressing the concern of 5 years, and then we get a report card and we find out if we're diploma or not diploma. So
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we're interested in helping with. We feel the same way. We don't want you to have to wait until the end to learn whether you graduated or not. And we do have the in-house expertise to assist with that. We did look at the plan, the impact management plan. The AMPs were the 10 municipalities that participated in submitted those. And similar to what Melissa said, they're some are more detailed than others, but they were generous at a high level and very sort of aspirational. And I've obviously all heard that we've got to move in the direction of more detailed, more refined implementation plans. And I think that's where our feedback would be probably more useful. But that's exactly the type of assistance we envision providing. And of course, we would be doing that. I assume, yes, we'd be doing that. We'd be, obviously, have slightly different perspectives and potentially based on different experiences. But Mark and Danielle, and would likely be a joint effort between our non-point source. And again, we're always talking about non-point sources in the context of the settlement, but it's there's an unregulated non-point source, but not an EMS water, but then there's a regulated stormwater vicinity. But we're kind of treating collectively, our law and water act, that clearly point or non-point. But we are going to work very closely together between the non-point stormwater programs and doing these.
I
yeah, I think I would say from the perspective, the general permit itself has a lot of flexibility in how the adaptive management plans can work, with voluntary. So that allows us a lot of flexibility going forward and how we'd like to see it work out. And I think that a framework of something like an annual report would be great. I mean, Mark and I have been talking a lot, mostly Mark, I just not, about how to go forward and what we'd like to see. And I think there's a lot of flexibility there, but definitely we'd like to see we could get a picture of what you've done in the past year, of compared to what you've done before, what the plan is for the next year, and just get that benchmark every year. That would be huge, because nobody wants to get 5 years down the road and find out, who's passed and who's failed or whatever it is. Everyone wants to do this, an ongoing communication. So I fully second the idea of moving forward in some form.
And actually, I gotta say, I really love that you're, that we're gonna have the opportunity to put it together. Because then we'll be able to, sometimes it's easier to report a certain way. Because, see how the data is generated and stuff like that. So this will be good, and then we can build on something that's like more permanent in there. So we'll focus on that for our community. Any other, I'm sensitive we've got a lot on the agenda. Sorry, but let me just say thank you for the letter. I do think it's helpful to keep us all on focus. I think just for the record, because I'm wearing now, put on the lawyer hat, which is, I don't think we quite have the firm target in the permit of that 100. We know what we're shooting for, and I kind of feel like we need to say that wearing that other hat, but I don't think we're in disagreement that we want to put a lot of good effort here, and I'm really excited about the conversation and where everything is going. So take it with that one hat, other hat, but I think we're looking forward to continuing to keep up what we do and keep rolling down the path that we're going. We're very excited about it. All right, and the one more piece that came out of that letter that I have to admit has dropped off my priority radar a little bit was the dashboard, and so just noted we're working on reinvigorate efforts on that. All right, then in the interest of moving things along, we will go on to, I think we did a little quick PTAP update from item number 10.
PTAP is moving forward. As we mentioned last time, we have 2 real reporting frameworks within PTAP. One is a simple sort of litmus test that uses, more simpler assumptions about implementation and particularly structural stormwater control measure accounting. And then we also developed a tool that we can take your annual report and your structural and non-structural activities and import them into the EPA's EMP accounting and tracking tool. And so that way, we're using the consistent accounting framework that EPA has already developed and comfortable with, and we can produce those reports. And so that is in our plan to do for communities after year 1. The main thing that we're working on now is to get everybody on the same page. And so just like the adaptive management plan, there's some differentiation of where people are. So we've been working pretty closely with Exeter and Portsmouth and Dover, who have largely taken the lead on PTAP implementation. And by that, I mean they've incorporated it into their site plan review regulations. So we recently met, we standardized the language that everybody, at least Dover and Portsmouth agreed was sufficient for the use based on their experience using PTAP. And then we identified the municipal code sections where this needs to be implemented. So we have a plan moving forward to assist communities that aren't up to speed yet. And we're working with Milton now, and we're working with Rollinsford to get the same language into your code, so that at least for new development and redevelopment that's governed by your site plan review and subdivision regulations, the developers are using PTAP work and putting their developments in PTAP as a condition of permit. We're also including them in the checklist for certificate of occupancy issuance, so that any changes between the permitted and the actual built also get incorporated into PTAP. And then that is all governed by your assigned administrators. We probably shouldn't have called them administrators, but the people like Jamie McCarty and Portsmouth who govern inputs into the database. So that's the one thing that really PTAP offers, let's say over the bat, because you could do this in the bat as well, but PTAP offers this kind of user chain and authentication process. So not everybody can just put things in. You have a town administrator assigned that looks at the development and does some compliance check. This is happening. This is consistent with with what we're seeing moving through the planning process, and you're acknowledging that that's happening and can be incorporated into your town database or city database. That's really the update. So we also would like to, Newington is next on our agenda, both to get the hotspot maps ready for them and also to get them ready for feedback. So, and we're happy to continue doing that for any community that needs. We're focusing on the man communities first, and then, this database is agnostic with respect to where you are in the watershed. So, we hope that it's a universal source that everybody, all the permanent communities can use.
And then Jamie, not to go on, but we also, we've got the Credit for Going Green projects, which is taking things that aren't currently don't have either any credits, mixed investment credits, or maybe not quite what we think it should be, and bringing them.
Yeah, so we're working right now on leaf collection. Actually, a number of people in this room are actively working on that. And trying to have a quorum. We almost have a quorum here, yeah. We're trying to really update, and we know that the leaf collection and street sweeping credits that were put in the MS4 permit were sort of a placeholder, and that they were a work in progress. It remains one of the most exciting aspects of nutrient control, this kind of source control. There's a lot of movement in Minnesota. There's a lot of movement in Vermont on this being one of the biggest load reductions per cost on the nutrient side. So we're working on those credits to get them commensurate with what we think the activities actually encumber as far as nitrogen. So we have a way to calculate that now based on area swept or lane miles. We can extrapolate an area from lane miles if that's how you're tracking it. But we hope to be updating that in the future. Hopefully in the next one. Mark, you want to say anything about that?
That's our hope. That we really would like to update that. We know that credits for those activities now are understood.
And I guess that's something just to keep in the back of all our minds. If it's something you think we could do that could get credits, we can continue to do these types of credit for going green projects. So, all right, we'll move on. Clifton, I'll let you do a quick update on the Brown and Caldwell work.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'll let you know what we're up to. Our scope of work in support of MAM on the technical activities is rather broad. So I want to make sure that folks are aware of what we've been doing in 2022 so far and what we plan to do for the rest of 2022 with the understanding that our priorities are to provide technical oversight and participation in the various monitoring activities and equip MAM to make good decisions on funding needs and priorities for the future and anticipate how this will all be tied together, ultimately bridging that gap between the science and future regulatory implications. So in 2022 so far, we have been participating in some of the prep hosted meetings, including the TAC, which is currently focused on the State of the Estuaries report.
But can you in and out? I don't know if there's something, I'm not sure why.
Well, I'm pretty close to my, to the dongle here, so I'm not sure what else I can do.
Okay, sorry, continue.
Okay, I'll try to get a little bit closer to it. We have been participating on behalf of MAM in the TAC for PREPS TAC that is currently focused on the State of the Estuaries report, as well as the PAC for the eelgrass resilience projects, and those are very useful meetings to keep track of progress on those and start to look at some of the cross-cutting issues and what could be done in the future. Another item that we worked on this year is working with CALA to develop a funding request template to make sure that with future funding requests to MAM, that there's at least a minimal information available on if not a full work plan, good information on what's being proposed, the scope, the deliverables to support funding decisions. And so CALA's been, that was well received, and that we hope that will be a useful tool moving forward. Looking ahead to the rest of 2022, we're going to continue to participate on behalf of MAM on the TAC and PAC meetings. Next TAC meeting tomorrow. Review the State of Estuary report sections. And as we recently discussed with CALA, we anticipate that midsummer, beginning of summer, June, there's going to be some smaller work groups focused on some future monitoring activities, such as reviewing existing monitoring network, storm monitoring, possibly in 2023, and better understanding the turbidity dynamics of the estuary. That is going to lead into the fall to another round of prioritizing funding recommendations for 2023, but also looking beyond to see, are there longer term gaps between the adaptive management plan monitoring commitments and what's currently on the books, and take actions to identify what's needed to fill those gaps. So that's about as quick as an update I could give, and I'm happy to take your questions.
All right, any questions for Clifton? Thank you for the update. I know you're covering a lot of information very quickly, so we appreciate all the work that you're doing for us.
Thank you.
Let's do a status update on the congressional spending, which I don't think will take too long, right?
No, that's good. So everyone saw Gretchen's email, the great news that our community directed spending request was approved for $1 million. We have not received further information at this time. We will be contacted directly with additional information on timeline for municipal uses. Unfortunately, we haven't received information at this point. So all we really have at this time is just the application, the request, and it's been approved. So I don't know if we want to schedule another meeting once we have the information, or want to briefly discuss initial thoughts on plans for the funding. I know Parks finalizing their budget right now, and the implications for this funding on their plans.
Yeah.
Also, I wonder if there's any value to Brian Caldwell's monitoring gap analysis, if maybe we should visit that sooner rather than later, and apply those gaps. But some initial thoughts about having that further guidance.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to need to wait until we get further information from the congressional office, and then maybe schedule a short meeting specific to that. Yep. To address that and also coordinate communication. So I'd say more is coming, but we probably need more information before we really spend time on that.
That's right, and we're committed to, I know, Paula, you're doing your budget. This is a bad problem to have, maybe more money coming your way, so, but as it unfolds, we'll figure it out, so.
May I ask, but this is Mel, a question on that. I had seen this earmark on a list in the last couple of weeks, and $1 geograph. I had no idea where, and of course, we haven't had earmarks in 12 years or so, and so we're sort of relearning how this all happens. What was the process through which you went? Because it seems like magic to me. Was there any particular state or other governmental entity that advocated for or lobbied, and what was the application process? And it's too long to explain, you know, we can put that up, you know, meeting that.
Yeah, go for it. So we had a NAM discussion on some of the application and what we'd like to apply for. At that point, we submitted a final text assembly to the main office, which we had facilitated. So we really advocated for us and feedback from her office on this process.
And you just presumably had to identify a fiscal agent to whom those funds would sort of be awarded by whom? I mean, there is ultimately some federal agency somewhere that's gonna make a grant or somehow get that money to you.
The subcommittee was the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee.
Oh, well, no. Well, I was gonna say, you know, among friends here, right, it did kind of come out of nowhere, because I didn't know, this one, Rochester took the lead on with a really fantastic job putting together, but this is the kind of stuff that lays on my desk at for work, and boy, we were just like, okay, you know, it was a bit of a scramble, to put together, applications, and there was one, this is Janine, and there was some other spending from Chris Pappas that came out, but, you know, I'm a little blind, so I was just sort of,
There were multiple proposals.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It was last spring, I want to say March, April time, that we were contacted by, I think all the communities were notified by the congressional delegates that there were going to be earmarks and that there were opportunities in every community and organization pivoted to put together meaningful projects. I know I've sort of received 2 other congressional directed spending support projects for, you know, siphons project, sewer siphons under the Swampscott River, and force mains associated with our Webster sewer pump stations, which are huge. And there were other efforts too. I think the police received something to do with bond hill. So I mean, it was cross many different.
environmental, yeah, there's transportation, yeah. Okay, stakeholder comment. Melissa, do you have anything to say?
No, one word.
All right. Thank you. Public comment? Open it up. Anyone from the public wishing to speak? Nothing? All right, I'm gonna go to other business then, and I'm not going to take too long, although I do really want to get some feedback. I was actually approached with a suggestion. You know, we're talking about source control being this high potential for pollution reduction, and there has been communities, there's been some reluctance to invest the huge funds that go towards using a regenerative street sweeper or vacuum assisted street sweeper. I went through it with our staff at Public Works. Ultimately, they were correct. I'd never driven a street sweeper, so they disregarded what I said. They got what they wanted. It's fair, but it is not this high performance street sweeper. And so we put together an application. Logistically, we still have to think through how this would all work. But the idea would be to use some of the Sebring grant money for us as a group to purchase one of these high-performance street sweeper units, and to both look at the performance, look at the long-term performance, but also, you know, similar to what Melissa was talking about with the septic systems, is really looking at the operational, the use, some of those other logistical and kind of at the boots on the ground, or kind of at the point of use bonuses and issues and et cetera, and then reporting back whether these are a really good investment for communities in our watershed, outlining some of the issues, hurdles, things like that.
I've agreed, Dover, I do have the support from both our community services director, John Starr, and Mark Doyle, the city manager, to allow Dover to house the unit and provide fleet maintenance on the unit, which would just be kind of a meantime contribution of time, but the idea would be using it regionally. So that, open up for feedback. Questions? Hearing none, we're gonna go ahead with this, and there would be, if we were funded, there is logistical stuff that we have to look through. But I think we can figure it out, so thank you.
Gretchen, just real quick.
Yes.
Long-term maintenance
Yeah.
would be Dover?
You know what,
The
the
engine
question,
blows, you guys
it's a
gonna
really good
replace
question.
it?
So what do we do? Do we use it for 3 years and then sell it to one community? I don't know. Long-term maintenance, yeah, I think we would look at doing like a 3-year project. And the funding would pay for, maintenance and things like that, and then how it rolls out in the future. And we'll see the funding. Okay. And honestly, there are questions. I don't know how, if it's Dover owns it and Portsmouth's using it and you guys get in a car accident, I don't know. I don't know. So,
That's two super accidents.
like, right, so those things are like stuff happening, but I think, we'll figure it out.
Got it.
The only other thing I would mention is that I agree, I think it's a great idea. In practice, it's a little challenging. I know that, training the driver is probably the most critical piece. That there's a lot of expensive equipment that needs frequent maintenance, with the brooms and brushes and the vacuum system. So I don't know how we develop a training program, or if there's some kind of sharing of an operator too that goes along with it, because we have one dedicated operator, and there's really no one else that operates that piece of equipment.
That's right. Yeah. And then who they report to and how, but yes, I think I think you're spot on. We wouldn't want to lose the learning process for everyone, but I think you're absolutely right. Hiring somebody that we can say dedicated, something dedicated, and do. No, right? It's always done somewhere, right? So we'll put that in and, we'll learn a bit as we go through there. But I think, any other business? Anyone else have news to share?
Can I just give a quick update for Rochester?
Oh, yeah, please.
I just wanted to share that our public works staff is making a presentation to planning board this month, regarding requiring developers to utilize moving forward. So that's moving forward the planning department and planning board, and so that's on the site. Additionally, we'll be spending the next couple of months to input all city-owned stormwater management.
Are you hiring somebody to do that, or are you doing it in-house, or?
Probably in-house, for this point. We have a new engineering position that might be assist us, has also spoke some more stormwater.
Yeah.
Also, from that.
That's good. Anything?
If you didn't hear before, we are offering a tour of our award-winning, thank you to EPA, we won, our award-winning wastewater treatment plant after this meeting. But yes, we're very honored and excited that we received the 2021 Operations and Maintenance Award from the EPA. We had an early visit with Senator Chapin to kind of celebrate that, and we'll be down there afterwards for anybody who has time or ability. If today's not a good day, we're more than happy to do towards another time.
So she's Miss McHugh. She's also been awarded top 10 public works directors in North America. Awesome. And I always say this, I say this of Suzanne's promotions. It's just great that somebody's been so vested in this work and because they work and we can see. Be honored. And that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is more like top 10.
Dallas. Yeah.
North America. North America, that's good enough.
That's really fantastic. Well deserved. Any other business? All right, schedule for next meeting. It sounds like we'll probably have an executive committee meeting, like within a couple of weeks to give feedback to, the stakeholders. So that'll be, maybe, you want to do like beginning of May? Before coming? Yeah, let's see, we'll do May. How about we'll do, does May 12th work for folks? I've got, I'm fully empty on May 12th. Maybe a short meeting, so if we did like at 10 o'clock again, would that work? Okay, at 10. Anyone want to offer to host? So do Rochester? All right. And then you can get me the set location later. And then do we want to do another members meeting? We can either do one in June, heading into the end of year one, or postpone and do one in July, looking back. Let's do one in June. How about, does June 19th work for anyone? That's a Sunday. Oh, I mean, no, sorry guys. Does June 16th work for people? I know we're getting into summer months, which gets worse. Yeah, no, for me. And do we think it's necessary to do something, or we could just wait and not do anything until like September?
What's my inclination is to put a placeholder on here, and not. I can always say 10. Sorry.
I'm just picking Thursdays, but if you do the 23rd, you do the 23rd too. Placeholder June 23rd, yeah.
I think we've got to make decisions on
Yeah.
Sunday.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I think we do Dover. I'm going to do Dover tomorrow, so we'll do Dover. And we'll do at 10 o'clock again? That works for people? All right.
And not just the members.
No, do full members. Okay. We have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded by Katie. All right, roll call, Suzanne Woodland, Katie Ambrose, Jennifer Perry, Gretchen Young, and I, yes, and Ray McNeil.
Aye.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Good meeting. Oh,
Going to towards today, I would love to, but I don't know how to write it down. I had to write it down.